Hey, party people. Welcome back to my super geeky series on principles of design as applied to fashion. The first in this series, we discussed emphasis and how to use the design principle of emphasis in fashion design using Schiaparelli as a case study. Today, we are going to discuss repetition and how repetition can be applied to fashion design and use McQueen, past and present, as the case study. Quick reminder that design principles or principles of design, I've heard it both ways, they are taught at art schools all over the world as they apply to different disciplines of art and design, and not just some random thing that I made up, although I would love to take credit. So let's talk about repetition. And you might be thinking, I already know what repetition means. It means you're just going to repeat a bunch of stuff over and over and over again. And so that's it. And you know what? Yeah, it is a fairly simple concept to grasp, which is good for all of us. But today, let's deep dive into how we can take repetition, the 4 different types of repetition, and how we can beautifully apply it to fashion design. There are 4 types of repetition, and I'm going to illustrate those 4 types using pictures of beautiful McQueen garments. Number 1, repetition. Number 2, motif. Number 3, tessellation. And number 4, ambiguity. Repetition, the umbrella of repetition, not the 4 different types, but all kinds of repetition, focuses on repeating elements over a surface of a garment and creates non-focal point design. Okay, it creates a visual interest all over the surface and not just one area, a design in which we are encouraged to look all over and not just one specific spot of the garment. This garment actually shows us both emphasis and repetition, where we have the repetition of the flower print all over the dress, and yet we have the emphasis, first of all, in the styling with the black belt, very sharp contrast. And then we also have the secondary emphasis of putting the flowers symmetrically right over the breasts. Okay. And then third, the flowers placed strategically and symmetrically right on the top of the sleeves. Okay. And then the bottom part is not particularly symmetrical. Repetition is taking the same thing and, creating a design, and it could be a wide design, it could be a singular element, and repeating it exactly the same over and over again, which in fashion is print. Okay. Basically print. This also can be done with embellishments, like if you bought a fabric with like a little bumblebee embroidery, interspersed, repeating exactly. There are several different kinds of repeats. You could have a diagonal repeat, you could have a straight grid repeat, but exact, mathematically exact repeat. Okay. Here is a mushroom print with a black ground. Here's this beautiful flower print. This one is really distinct. You have the little sections of the small flowers with leaves, and then the distinct larger flowers. Here, the mushrooms are very big, and they're many different kinds. So you can't really see a distinct repeat, but it's repeating because you're seeing the same ones. Like this one is the same as this one and as this one and this one. So they're repeating. And you can do this too. If you don't like the look of perfectly repeating grid, then you can develop a print like this one and this one where it looks a little bit more loose and scattered. Although with this perfectly placed big flowers over the breasts, it's like, that's also precisely designed, okay? And you can also do that too. That's called placed prints. Here is another print where the scale is so large that you don't see like the perfect mathematical repeat. And this is often how the House of McQueen does their prints, where the scale is so large, you don't see the exact repeat perfectly. but it is repetition. It makes the eye move all over. There's not a singular focal point. I mean, with this one, you could say the breasts because the flower's there, but it's really like all over. Your eye does travel. It's not like with Schiaparelli where we had one gold boob with a baby hanging off of it. Lace is also a form of repetition because a lot of these big all over lace fabrics are repeating, sections, repeating perfectly over and over again in a grid formation. Lace trims, even if they don't repeat up and down, they'll repeat side to side in a narrow trim. Motif is when you have multiple closely related, similar elements, and they're not necessarily arranged in a perfect grid repeat across a garment. This, for example, you have the sprayed black graffiti, you have the sprayed yellow-green graffiti. The lines are organic but similar in stroke and size to each other. They're two different colors, and the haphazard organic layout are similar to each other, okay? Motif. Here is a latter-day homage to the original dress where, again, you have the graffiti lines, two different thicknesses, but that same visual texture of the fuzzy spray action across a white ground. Here is another illustration of motif, not as a print, but as 3D elements. Look at all of these beautiful feathers, several different types of feathers, but like laid out, not all over the place. It's not just like a mess of feathers on the floor, but they are all laying vertically. And of course they move out as the model walks, but there are many that are identical to each other. And there are a few different kinds, but they follow a color story. They're all related to each other, but they're all different sizes, okay? Motif. They follow a theme. Same with these, okay? You're not going to sit here and be like, this is identical to this feather, to this feather, to this feather, okay? But they're all gold feathers of a similar size. So, you do have a range within motif. You can get something that's more tight-knit like this, or you can have something that's a little bit more varied. Here's a motif using lace, where the lace has been cut apart and is coming around the dress, strategically placed to follow the contours of the dress. But it's not like a perfect grid layout. I mean, I guess they're like symmetrical along center front, but it's not a repeating print for repetition. Tessellation is a print, and it can also be done with like literal 3D tiles also. But a tessellation is a type of print where all the pieces are perfectly interlocking. You do not have a distinct background. There's no, it's not flowers on a background. It's like perfectly interlocking. There's no spaces in between. Here's a tessellation of a few different shaped tiles. So they don't all have to be exactly the same shape like this one. They can be a few different shapes. We've got some stars, we've got some hexagons, and then we've got the wavy squigglies, okay? We've got two different kinds of wavy squigglies, the ones that wrap the hexagon and the ones that wrap the star, but they're perfectly interlocking. You cannot say this is distinctly the background and this shape is distinctly the background. No, they're all perfectly interlocking. One of the most common tessellations that occur in nature is the honeycomb. And one of the most common tessellations that occur in fashion is the houndstooth. And McQueen loves a houndstooth. It may be a reference back to OG Alexander McQueen's Savile Row days. Houndstooth is a very popular traditional menswear fabric, and he used it in menswear. He used it in accessories. Another McQueen accessory. Here's McQueen houndstooth on the runway. Fun fact, did you know that when houndstooth is really, really small in scale, it's called puppy tooth? That's a real thing. You could Google it. Here's McQueen himself cutting houndstooth. Here is an MC Escher illustration that it starts with a tessellation and then expands, which was the inspiration for this Alexander McQueen gown. It's got the birds. It starts with the houndstooth, and the houndstooth starts to dissolve into the birds. So we've got a tessellation up at the top, we've got a transition, and we have a print at the bottom. We have distinct repeating birds on a solid ground. And it still fulfills the point of repetition where our eye moves around. Okay? The whole point of repetition is our eye moves around and it gives visual interest to the surface, but it doesn't plant your eye in one specific place. It makes you look at the whole thing. And having a few different kinds of repetition in one garment absolutely helps you move your eye across the entire garment. Ambiguity is when you have a lot of elements that are not the same. They don't even have to be similar. With motif, you follow a theme, a motif, as you would, and you have a variety within that theme. But with ambiguity, you can have kind of an umbrella theme. I think I saw, what is that Prada dress with all the sewing, the beading that looked like a bunch of sewing materials, little scissors and stuff. Okay. That's similar. Okay. This one, there's all these brooches. They are not related to each other in any sort of concrete theme. This one is a sun. That's, I think, a fish. I think that's a cactus, whatever. And they're all over the garment so that your eye moves. Okay. You're looking all over the garment at these various jeweled brooches. They look on first glance kind of haphazard, all over the place, when in actuality, they're strategically placed to give it that all over look. It's not like a cluster on one breast so that you're looking at all the brooches together. It's not one single brooch over a blank garment. They are strategically all over the place. Are you trying to tell me that McQueen sent something out on the runway that isn't extremely strategically and deliberately designed and styled? Absolutely not, right? Right. Okay. This one kind of straddles the fence between motif and ambiguity for me. You have a lot of ruffles. So under the motif realm, you've got a lot of different kinds of ruffles, but they're a little too extra haphazard for me. This reads more ambiguity because it doesn't follow a specific direction. It's not laid out in any sort of way. This is spread out in such a way that there is no real point of emphasis. I think the pink transitions so much that your eye keeps bouncing white to black to pink to white to black to pink. Instead of, if this was an all white dress with one black section, our eye would be drawn to that black section. Okay, but we kind of keep going back and forth with the transition. This dress and this dress, part of the same collection, classic ambiguity, where I don't know if it's like one big print that they chopped off and placed strategically, or there are a bunch of different prints that have been seamed together, but it's basically the thing that is in common is all these print fabrics, and they're all over the place. They follow a loose, broad color story where the tones are similar to each other. But, this section is blue and white. This section is green and orange. And this section is red, blue, and yellow. They're all over the place. And that each print was placed strategically for maximum effect. But it looks haphazard. It looks ambiguous. Ambiguity. Same with this dress. Your eye moves. The whole point of ambiguity is to have what looks like a bunch of discordant items, elements, kind of all in one place. But because of the way they have been deliberately arranged, your eye moves. Your eye moves. Typically, we look at garments from head to toe. Human nature, we typically look at people's faces when we look at them first or meet them for the first time. And so you start looking down and it gets brighter as you go down. So your eye is drawn down. Your eye is drawn to look all over the garment. And You cannot convince me that was not deliberate by the House of McQueen. 4 types: repetition, motif, tessellation, and ambiguity. And again, no super geeky series would be complete without homework assignments. And just like last time, I have 2. And just like last time, the first one is to take photos of the 4 different types of repetition as you see them and identify them in the world around you. And I'm going to guess that repetition is fairly easy to spot. You're going to see a lot of print fabrics. I would say ambiguity is the most difficult, but that's not necessarily true for everyone. Everybody's brains are different, right? But I want you to, again, part of understanding, like really like muscle memory understanding a concept is to identify it very quickly. The other day, my husband and I were at the dentist, and the dentist was attending to my husband, and I was kind of in the backdrop, and I noticed my dentist's shirt, and it had a really delicate, beautiful flower print, and I immediately in my brain, without even like thinking about color schemes, was like, oh, those flowers and leaves are a split complementary color scheme. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm such a color geek. I want you to be able to do that with design principles. Always be able to identify, all these things without thinking about it too hard and how they can apply. I want to turn y'all into design geeks, all right? So go out in the world and take photos as you identify the 4 different types of repetition. The second homework is fashion related, of course, and I want you to think about house codes and brand aesthetics. We've had many conversations about this and videos about this. I'll link some in the description box below. But a lot of brands, especially older brands, they have colors and motifs that they use, special imagery, a specific flower that they use over and over again. Chanel uses the chameleon every collection and has for decades. Dior, OG Christian Dior, loved Lily of the Valley, and the House of Dior continues to use that in everything from clothes, prints, all the way to dishes. And Yves Saint Laurent loved the heart, like literal heart symbol, and incorporated heart symbolism in clothes, jewelry, perfume bottles, graphic design and labeling, a lot of heart imagery. So I want you to take an element and, don't think so hard about this is going to be your house code forever, okay? But take an element and apply it to the 4 different kinds of repetition. So for me, for example, let's say I pick a feather, okay? So I would create a print. I would illustrate a feather, and then I would put it on a repeat, and I would create a print design of a feather. And I do have print design videos. I'll link those below. And then for 2, motif, I would design a corset, and I would sketch out how the feathers of varying sizes, similar feathers, but of slightly varying shapes and sizes, be not in a perfect grid formation, but molded to that corset so that it's following the curves and contours of the corset in these beautiful feathers. And then number 3, for tessellation, I would make that feather very graphic and turn it into a very geometric shape and tile those feathers into a tessellation. And then the 4th, ambiguity, I would take the 2 prints, the tessellation and the original feather print, and I would patchwork them, not in perfect squares, but in random shapes, and then take a bunch of different kinds of feathers, peacock feathers, coke feathers, like super long, stringy chicken feathers, y'all know about my thing with feathers and chickens and whatever. Anyway, so just throw the chicken feathers over this haphazard print patchwork. And again, ambiguity is not just haphazard scattering. it looks like a haphazard scattering, but is actually deliberately arranged so that there are no focal points and that your eye keeps moving across the composition. Okay, so those would be my 4 fashion-related designs using my 1-element feathers. Okay, so that's it for today. Please like this video if you learned something new today. Share with your friends, all that good stuff. Subscribe, share, all the ways you show me love. Buy my sketchbook. I think it's fantastic. I continue sketching with it. So buy my sketchbook, and I will see you in the next video.